Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Don Gates, an alcoholic. I know a couple of other people who are going to something called the Rolling Stones. I am what you call chronologically challenged. I haven't fully recovered from the death of Glenn Miller. I'm going to do a few minutes till I think of something to say. I noticed a number of meetings have had to make the little pitch for greater donations, and I thought about it a little bit because, in fact, it actually caused me to change my own approach to it. It has to do with currency. It is so simple to grab a dollar. I mean, that is the thing we throw in, a dollar. Now, I came into AA almost 40 years ago, and I always threw in a dollar, even though I was a dollar. And by the way, inflation has taken quite a bite, and even though I'm in a profession where you have to take a vow of poverty, I still make more than 10 times what I made when I was throwing in that dollar. So if I were to be anywhere near proportionate, I should throw in a 10 every time. And once I realized that, even though half measures avail us nothing, I began throwing in 5s. I mean, you got to kind of wean yourself onto that, but a dollar is absolutely ridiculous. Many of us sit down and write donations to organizations that we mean nothing to us compared to what AA is, and yet we'll throw in a silly dollar. I have had a strange sort of a day in a way. I'm always used to, I've been speaking here off and on now for about 38 years, and Chuck and Elsa used to sit right up front there, and I came down in order to take their inventory, and Chuck, I would tell him how Chuck would explain what Bill thought he saw. And I miss them terribly because he was my guru, my mentor. When I was truly fouled up, I would go in and talk to him, and he would give me the most idiotic advice. I mean, absolutely pusillanimous platitudes that saved my life. I can remember one time going in to talk to him. I used to go talk to him. He said he wouldn't sponsor anyone. You could call him sponsor if you wanted to, but it gave you no more prerogatives than anyone else. And I would go see him every 5 years. I didn't want him to think I was a whiner. But I would go see him when I could virtually smell the vodka. And I would walk in and denounce him, which is what you should do. I mean, in other words, if you're going to someone for assistance, you should explain to them that they can't possibly help you. It reflects on your good judgment in consulting them. And I went in, I told him, I don't know why I talked to you, Chuck, for God's sake, you're married to that Saint Elsa. If she ever stepped back once, she would just topple like Ozymandias, crash on. And I went on and on like that. And he listened, and he said, well, you're right, Don, I don't understand your problem. I can't share your problem. If you want someone who can share your problem, I would suggest you go up to the divorce courts in Los Angeles and watch them walking around with their knuckles white and their jaws tense. I'm going to get even, going to get that bitch on the stand, make her admit she's an unfit mother right in front of the children. He said, or you could go up to Camarillo or Norwalk, and on some of the back wards you would find people just about as crazy as you are who can share your problem. Or you can go up to San Quentin. You will find people locked up for life for doing what you think is an appropriate solution. He said, if you want someone to share your problem, that's where you want to go. Don't come to me. He said, if you want the answer, of course, I've got the answer. You know, what is it, Chuck? He said, Don, either God is or he isn't. I said, oh, thank you, Chuck, thank you. Oh, God, thank you. Yeah. About 3 or 4 years later, I would think, what the hell does that mean? Here I am with numbers after my name and letters, and God is or he isn't. I really miss him. He's terrible. And the trouble is that sic gloria transit mundi. I mean, fame is so fleeting, particularly in AA. If you want to get a laugh in Des Moines, Iowa now, you have to mention Clancy. If you mention Chuck, they say, Chuck who? You know, it's just awful. I hope his tapes and his books and so on continue to produce, because he was an incredible fellow. But the day I had was frustrating in many respects, but every single thing that happened to me, or let us say that I had to treat with, would never have happened to me when I first got here. I didn't have any of the things. You know, life was rather simple. When I first came around to AA, they used to say alcohol in small quantities will remove spots on clothing, and in larger quantities removes clothing. And in still larger quantities will remove houses, cars, names on doors, licenses. It will remove everything, including the drinker, should he persist long enough. But if he can stop just when all the material things have been removed, he'll be able to see the picture just as plain. You know, and I thought about that, because everything that was annoying me today were things I didn't have to worry about when I got here. I had to switch over or set up our house for the winter, getting cooler instead of the air conditioning, and I was fighting with this, coolers and conductors and things. And when you're living in a hotel room with a bottle of wine and a copy of Playboy, you really didn't care very much about the change in the seasons. I didn't have a house to be concerned with. My wife wanted to come and do a few things that were slightly inconvenient to me, and she's a beautiful young lady who not only seems to care for me, but doesn't object to old age creeping on her at night. And when I got here, that was not something that, there was no one who wanted to have anything to do with me. We have a new puppy, and we found we couldn't take her on the beach and couldn't take her in a park where we intended to take a walk and all this and that, and I didn't have any problem. Well, I had a short dog maybe in my hip, a small Mickey of wine, but I didn't have a thoroughbred Vizsla to worry about. I mean, all of these things. I was even worried about a couple of cases I have pending, and when I first came around AA, I was worried about the Supreme Court going to disbar me. And now it just, now When I write a decision, it becomes binding law on every lower court, every trial court in the United States. I mean, in California, 32 million people. It appears in every law library in the United States. When I knew everything, when I got here, nobody wanted to hear a damn thing I had to say. I talked to Judge Ito the other day. He was thinking about issuing a gag order. And I told him, don't bother. All I need to do is hear about that case, and I gag automatically. I don't know. All of these problems that I presently have, I didn't have when I got here. Life was so simple. And yet, as a practical matter, of course, it could hardly even be called living. If you drank as I drank, you were a complete slave to booze. It told you what you were going to do. I used to think, and I still hear people get up and under the guise of telling what they used to be like, they give a drunkalogue of the things that happened to them, often implying they did it on purpose. I've even heard them say, I can't blame the things I did whilst drinking on the flit. And I always think, oh, poor pathetic souls that it should come to that. I mean, I can. I blame every rotten thing almost that ever happened to me on booze. I didn't do it on purpose. I never walked into a consular's office, said, I think I'd like to major in vomiting. A minor in diarrhea would sound interesting. I never planned an evening the way it went. I never said, what'll we do? It's Friday night, I got a pint in the house, I think I'll kill that and then I'll go out and total a car. I've just canceled the insurance to save money, so that'll be a good start. Perhaps on the way to the hospital, the ambulance attendant will roll me so I'll have no identification and I can spend 24 hours being humiliated down at General. But I can get out on Sunday and I can cuff another jug on the way home. I can terrorize the wife and children all day Sunday afternoon. No, I mean, it's obvious that I'm far too sophisticated, urbane, and gentle a soul to do things like that, but they happen to me. So to tell you about those things really wouldn't, of course, tell what I was like. It was almost like when I took a cork out of a bottle, a genie would come out, but except instead of my telling it what to do, it would tell me what we're going to do. And only after I stopped drinking that did life really begin, though at the time I didn't recognize it. That's why, despite the drive down here, I always take something from this meeting, and a couple of your members here have given me inspiration to live by. I'll protect their anonymity and just call them John Ackerland and Tommy Whalen. But as they say, to be asked to speak at an AA meeting is always an honor, a privilege, and usually one hell of an inconvenience. But they come up and speak at our meetings in Los Angeles, and it's happy to do the opposite. Chances are I think I may just do some of my old shticks here tonight that I don't usually do, because I'm going to be retiring in a few months, and I only have one more faculty to become impaired. That's the nice thing about the judiciary and other professions. When you get old and feeble and weak in your mind, they fire you. In the judiciary, they just put you on a higher court. But in a few months, I will be retiring, and I will be leaving the area, so this will probably be the last time I have an opportunity to come down and share a monologue with you. And a couple of people mentioned some of the old stories that I used to tell, and still do from time to time, but not generally. Because, as I say, I don't see any point in telling what I used to be like, because what I was like was not what happened to me. I was like every new alcoholic I ever met, kind, loving, gentle, considerate, caring. Like one of our ex-presidents who used to say, come, let us reason together. Let us do it my way. And they won't do it. Out of sheer spite, they won't do it. They smite us the 90 and 9 blows, and if we retaliate once, they send us into a pariah's nest. But this one story that has become apparently kind of, it's odd. We can get up speaking and string together glittering jewels of insight on which you can build a life. And the only thing the audience will ever remember is some incident in which you made a boob of yourself. And I'm exactly the same way. I hear John and Tom talk. If they don't tell of some particular story in which they were absolutely grotesquely stupid, I miss it. I mean, that's what I remember about it. All the names that we don't even hear about anymore is why I'm probably time for retiring. Remember Eddie Regan? Back before they built the freeway through the Coenga Pass, it used to be a two-lane tunnel. And he hit one side head on. I remember that. Norm Alpe, who, if something was too big to steal, he lay down beside it and claimed it. I don't remember all of their spiritual insights. And the thing that people have sometimes associated with me was when I described one time where I first began to realize that drink might be a problem. Because prior to this occasion, I had always been able to blame, or at least partially blame, anything that happened to me on someone else. Because it is virtually impossible to come into conflict with society without some member of society contributing. It's almost impossible to do it otherwise. And so you can justify it, rationalize it. If he hadn't have made a left turn, I wouldn't have hit him, which is true, but if I hadn't been an unguided missile coming down the street, I might have seen he was making the left turn about a half a block earlier. But on this particular occasion, I'll describe it because it was where I got some insight. See, I drank almost exclusively to relax. And on the occasion that I'm going to reminisce about, I'd been relaxed almost a week. And I awakened from a fitful sleep, horrible nightmares, Dante's Inferno, visions of the hellfire damnation. I could smell the sulfur, and the imps were poking at me, and I stood up, and I found I was just drenched with perspiration. I thought, what's wrong? What's happened? I mean, even fleetingly, I did think it might connect with alcohol. But then I saw such wasn't the case. I saw that what had happened was I had nodded off on a couch. My family having gone to wherever it was they used to go at night, and as I lay on this couch, I apparently had nodded off with either a cigarette in my mouth or hand, and it had fallen upon the covering, that kind of celluloid covering, whatever it is they have on the top of couches that separates it from the matting and the tacking, and it had burnt through into the inside, where lacking oxygen enough to take flame, the embers had slowly spread through the matting throughout the course of the night. And so I saw there was nothing wrong with my drinking. I had simply been barbecued. So I commending myself on my perspicacity, I went into the kitchen, got a butcher knife. At first, actually, I think I started more subtly. I got a pitcher of water and brought it back and tried to pour it into that little hole. Produced a cascade on the carpet, but that was about all. So then I went into the kitchen. I got this butcher knife. I knew dramatic measures now were needed. I came back and I slashed the couch from one end to the other, opened it up, and then subdued the embers with the cooling balm of the water. The only thing was that it produced acrid black smoke. Now this has been actually almost 50 years ago, half a century, a quarter of this nation's history. And yet I can remember standing there, looking down at that slashed and sodden mess, and realizing that almost to a certainty my wife was going to notice it. She was a very keen-eyed woman. There were little that passed her ken around that house, I'll tell you. And though she was a good woman, I mean, she had never met Elsa, but she was a good woman who would do nothing to emasculate the head of the household, insult the manhood of the man to whom she was wed. But on the other hand, in moments of stress, she had been known to say things that were unkind, cruel even, things that later would give her great cause for remorse when she thought about them. I mean, she might say, "You drunken son of a bitch, you did it again, didn't you?" See? And this would naturally cause her pain later when she reflected on what she had said. So I wanted to spare her this. The only thing was I didn't know what to do until it suddenly dawned on me, get the couch out of the house. I mean, she might vaguely remember there'd been something on that side of the room, but out of sight, out of mind. The only thing is, it isn't easy to be moving a couch when you should be checking into a sanitarium. But with that Herculean strength that comes only to the panic-stricken youthful alcoholic, I somehow managed to heft that monster up onto my shoulder and lurch out the front door. At that time, we were living on the second floor of an apartment building that had a very small porch. I remember it had columns. I virtually beat myself to death caroming off the posts trying to make the turn, bong, 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 bong. But eventually I did complete the descent. And then I realized, and only then, like Bobby Burns' mouse, foresight had not been my long suit. There is virtually no place to conceal a couch in the typical apartment patio. So I'm standing there, legs trembling. I should be in a hospital, but I'm moving furniture. And I remembered a creek about 5 miles away. So I staggered to my car and I hefted that brute up on top of it and got in to drive to my selected place of repose. Now, all I have ever truly aspired to in life is dignity. I have not cavilled at disaster when I could face it with dignity. But as I was driving down the street, it was now daylight. I don't know what time it was, 7:30, something, but daylight anyhow. There were people at the bus stops with lunch pails and briefcases. How they stay up that late, I'll never know, but and as I went down the street, I noticed that all of their heads turned to follow me. Eyes wide. Jaws agape. I thought, by golly, it doesn't take much to draw a crowd in California, I'll say that. Until I chanced to pass in front of an auto dealership that had a dusty window, a large window that acted as a mirror, and I got a view of what it was they were looking at. Here was a fellow driving down the street, nattily attired in a bathrobe, had a week's growth of whiskers, and on top of his car rested a couch, which previously had lacked oxygen enough to take flame, but going down the street, the wind was going through it like a billows. The flames were 30, 40 feet in the air. Now, when I ultimately returned to my household, I could think of no way to blame my sleeping wife and children for having risked their lives and put them in peril as they obviously had. And it did indeed dawn on me that perhaps alcohol might be causing me a certain amount of problem. But that's enough about drinking. Let's just say that subsequently I was to move beyond social drinking. In fact, I wasn't even coming into conflict with society at the end. How much conflict can you come into in a hotel room in Mobile? But that's what it seems to take, that state of sweet reasonableness known only to the dying, that is almost a prerequisite to admitting that you might be wrong. I mean, alcoholics sometimes, we are the most incredibly willful people. I mean, non-alcoholics sometimes say to us, you alkies, you're lacking in willpower. You know why they say that? They think we wanted to stay sober. God. If they had any idea what our true goal was, they would stand in awe of our dedication and perseverance. I mean, what do they have they will pursue to the gates of insanity or death? Nothing. They're candy asses, all of them. Sorry. I'm sorry, I know there's an Al-Anon here. You are not at fault, you just seem to have been born that way. No, but the thing is that, by the way, it's not unique to alcoholics, really, but we're just like the rest of mankind, really. We're not going to give up a lifetime of failure without a struggle. We're like the non-alcoholic. We wouldn't cross the street if we thought it'd make us feel better. I'll stay right here and hurt. I can take it as long as you can, you son of a gun. I won't change. I'll stay here and hurt. But ultimately, we are forced to come in and work a program that is, as near as I have been able to tell, a rather succinct summation of the absolute total unanimity with which every saint, sage, elder of the village, who ever reflected upon how you should live, has agreed on. Nothing unique about AA. I've read books written over 2,000 years ago that were direct plagiarisms from our big book. I mean, what is the sine qua non of it? You have to be honest. The only people can't make it are people can't be honest. Honesty is not a unique concept. Down at Chino Prison in the Iron Scroll works over one of the gates, it says, "The truth shall set ye free." I have explained that means ultimately, not immediately. The idea of taking fearless inventory and making confession doesn't come as a shock to most Catholics. I mean, actually, there was really nothing novel in AA except we have to do it. See, we say we're a spiritual movement and not religious, which is true. We all understand what we mean by that. We don't have any ideology. We don't have any dogma. We don't have anything that you have to believe. But sometimes we say it in a way that almost implies religions are not spiritual, which always comes as a shock to the Pope. Some of them have been struggling along for millennia while we were sucking on a jug and not able to explain it to them. But no, the difference in what we do and what they also preach, forget again their dogma, their ideology, they preach the same things. The only difference is we have to do it. They don't. See, they can write these things, they can argue about them, they can debate them, they can go to war and kill each other over them. The only thing they don't have to do is to work them. We have to. Frightening as it is, we have to live happy lives. I don't want to scare the newcomer off, but you can get used to happiness. Even contentment can be endured in time. But we have to do it, and not because we want to, just because if we don't, we're going to get taken drunk. That's what drives us. The great scourge is the alcoholism. That's what makes me do things that will make me happy despite my wishes. And as I say, there's nothing to me it's very simple, really. The steps, remember the book was written by Bill when he had only been sober, 3 or 4 years? And there were 100 people who were sober 1 year, and they said, these are the steps we took. When did he take them? Assume they weren't lying to us. May have been a lot of mendacity around Akron in those days. But assume they weren't lying to us. When did they take them? They took them all the first year. It was the only time they had. They didn't know anything about being sober 10, 20, 30, 40 years. They didn't know anything about gurus who can't find their ass with either hand but can lead the multitudes forth, you know. Now, I mean, the book is so straightforward and so simple in its recommended, suggested steps that I don't think you could become confused about them unless you went to a step study meeting, really. And if you do them, of course, they work. And then you begin to deal with all of life's problems, exactly the same problems that non-alcoholics have. I've never met an alcoholic yet who had a problem different than the non-alcoholic in the emotional, psychiatric sense. Our book says, in the doctor's opinion, the only thing that distinguishes us from the non-alcoholic is the phenomenon of craving that results from taking the first drink. Other than that, nothing. We have psychotics on our program. Why not? Damn few of them, but why should they get off any easier than the rest of us? We have sociopathic inferiors, a book says, and that's certainly true. Why not? We have neurotics in every hue on the emotional spectrum. You know, and the book also says we have people normal, healthy, lovable, affectionate people in every respect except the effect alcohol has on them. I've never met any of them, but sobering up in Southern California, one wouldn't be apt to. They were that crowd around Akron that I was speaking of. But the thing is, our problems, we have to treat with them. The non-alcoholic doesn't. Chuck was absolutely correct. These various people in these prisons, hospitals, divorce court, they're not alcoholic and non-alcoholic. They have the same problems, except they don't have to deal with them. And when you do it, by the way, don't ever confuse the speaker's problems with your problems. You know, speakers get up and under the guise of talking about alcoholism, they talk about their own peculiar hang-ups. Some of them even refer to, well, that's the way alcoholics are. You know, or even worse, that's the ism. You know, that'll make you vomit up your sleeve if you think about it. What the hell do you mean that's the ism? I remember one guy was talking about how he said, you know, when I was drinking, I was in the pool maintenance business. And if I needed some dough, I'd just go in and tell somebody, your pool motor burned out, you need a new one. They'd give me $175, I'd paint it blue and put it back in. I thought, my God. And he said, but that's what alcoholics are like. I thought, the hell that is, that's what thieves are like. I was just infuriated because just earlier that week, my pool man had come to me. I don't think he was alcoholic. I think he was Japanese, and I heard him say, "You die, Yank." You think it's funny we talk this way, Flyboy? And no, but on that, you know, we had a guy who used to get up at my early meetings when I was brand new and look out over the audience and say, the first thing you're going to have to do, should you want to make this program, is admit you're a thief, because all alcoholics are thieves. You know, that stunned me, because I didn't steal physical things. I took love, affection, tenderness, kindness, anything worthwhile in life, but I didn't steal material things. Maybe I didn't need it badly enough, or maybe I was too I don't know, but I didn't steal things. And it really disturbed me. And then I realized he doesn't know all alcoholics. Even if he has a relatively wide range, he couldn't know more than 50, 100 with any degree of... what he has told you tells you nothing about all alcoholics, but it told you something about him. When a man says all alcoholics are thieves and I'm an alcoholic, I know something about him. He's a thief. And he was. I watched him rip off newcomers for years. Didn't hurt either one of them. But, another guy was even worse. He would look out at the audience and then he would point finger over the room and say, the first thing you're going to have to do if you want to make this program is admit you're a latent homosexual. This was difficult for me because I was trying to give up drinking and he's telling me I've got to give up boys. Hell, I'd never tried them. And as far as I know, they might very well be the answer. My wife sure as hell wasn't producing much satisfaction in her life. And then I realized he doesn't know all alcoholics, but I've learned something kind of interesting about him. So the problems you will have when you get into your inventory will probably be somewhat different than other people, but they will be the same problems that mankind has always suffered with. The 7 deadly sins weren't written about alcoholics, they're written about humanity. We are human beings, and we have all of the faults that flesh are heir to. And we're going to work on them. In fact, it seems to me, after having taken a few inventories and worked at it for a number of years, that really all I had to do was, in one sense, grow up. I had to do the things that grown-ups do. Postpone satisfaction. Do a job whether I thought it practical or not. All of the little simplistic things. I think, though, more than the rewards, of course, that come from that are astounding. I mean, there's just no question about it. I tell this story sometimes about how I've been sober a few years and trying to get back into my profession, having gotten myself squared away with the state bar, and going into a law firm to try to get a job. And I'd been around AA long enough to know that our stories can be the source of innocent merriment. But I had not yet realized that the non-alcoholic will usually fail to see the humor in them. And so I told him a few icebreakers. I mean, not big boffle stories, but a few little lighthearted ones. Maybe the time I got drunk, threw my mother-in-law down the steps, or being intoxicated, fell after, got a hernia, something like that. And this guy didn't giggle a gig, tit or tit. He just kind of stared. And I thought, well, I guess I'm being too subtle for him. So I told him at the time I was in 4-point restraint and vomited straight up. I got a reaction, and finally I said to him, look, I'm not asking you to recommend me. And he said, recommend you? Recommend you? I wouldn't offer your name for consideration. No attorney in the history of this nation has ever done the things that you've done or had happen to him, the things that have happened to you. I suggest you go into the countryside. Try to regain your health in simple labor. Forget the law. When members of this law firm walk into a courtroom, they represent strength in the face of adversity, dedication, and perseverance. Send you? Never. I was crushed. I was devastated. I wasn't ready for this. If I could have slithered like a serpent across the floor under the door to drown the shame of that in that bottomless bottle like I always had, I'd have done it. But then I thought, if I do that, that fellow will be right. I can't take it, and I won't give him the satisfaction. I went out and drank coffee at him. About 10 years later, that guy flipped out. Cold sober. He took the check protector, one of the secretaries, ran to Paris, disgraced his law firm, disgraced the legal profession, disgraced his family, the city of Pasadena. One of the most beautiful pyrotechnic displays of misconduct I ever saw. And he did it cold sober. It's been now, 14 or 15 years ago, the governor of our state called me and told me he was appointing me to the appellate bench. As far as I know, the highest judicial office ever held by a sober alcoholic, at least in the state of California. You know what happens now if I enter a courtroom and members of that law firm are there? They stand up and they remain standing until I tell them they can be seated. All power to the powerless. You know, and yet in reality, I haven't changed all that much. I don't drink, of course, which is the greatest change that can come into the life of an alcoholic. I've learned to laugh at myself, which, by the way, if one fails to do it, they miss the greatest joke in their own generation. But basically, I'm the same type of person. I have to work on the same problems, and even more unfortunate, I have to work with the same answers. They do not become more sophisticated with a few decades of sobriety. I don't know why it just flashed through my mind. I remember this house I was talking about, we're getting ready to sell. When I bought it a number of years back, it was kind of a fixer-upper. A guy, his wife had left him, and he had been living in there with 3 dogs. And one of the quartet had been urinating on the floor, and it required quite a bit of work and fixing the things up and so on. But I went out into the backyard with him before I bought the thing, and he had a fairly good-sized pool in the backyard, and there were leaves 1 inch, 2 inches thick on the pool, because the neighbor's trees at the boughs came clear over the pool, and they were shedding. They could see them falling down into the pool. And I said to him, "Look, for God's sake, why don't you get your neighbor to cut those trees?" And he said, "You can't. The man's insane. You take your life in your hands even to go out there. Don't speak to him. He's crazy." And I thought to myself, This is what I do in the daytime when I face a problem. I say, Because if you're really going to think about a problem, you've got to wait until you go to bed and turn off all of the lights. See, true reflection requires utter darkness where there's no possibility of proportion or perspective. That's when you want to give her a think. So after I bought the thing, I'm lying there about to go to sleep, and I thought, well, this Saturday I better go over and talk to that guy about those trees. No problem, I'll just go in, I'll give him my card. I'll say, "Fellow, about those trees," and he'll say, "Why don't you take your card and stick it up your nose?" Why, that dirty, you better not say that. Well, no, I won't start that way. I won't start trying to impress him. What I'll do is go ahead and give him a couple of funny stories. See, lighten him up. And then I'll tell him about that. He'll say, "You think you're funny, ass?" Ooh, that dirty bastard. Yeah. So now I really began to play I'll say, he'll say. And the more I played it and the more obnoxious that guy became, the more upset I got. The delirium is a disease of the night. My stomach is filled with acid, my head is beginning to ache. Finally I get up and I'm pacing up and down the hall. And I'm saying to myself, "Stop it, Don, stop it, for God's sake, you're a main speaker." Sometimes even that doesn't get it. My higher power has never and apparently will never do anything for me that I'm capable of doing for myself. But what is worse, it won't do anything for me that I think I'm capable of doing for myself. In other words, if there is one way I think I can still wrest my will from the universe, I can't turn that thing over. But finally, it finally got so ridiculous. In this case, the thought, after all this thinking, the answer came to me. Just bang. Because for every problem, no matter how difficult, how complex, there is always one simple answer, which is wrong. This one, it came to me, it's so simple. Kill him. No problem here. Find out when he goes to work in the morning, get down the street with a carbine. When he comes up, pop, that's it. That takes care of the damn problem. Nobody will ever think Sweet Don did it. The fact that you're in trouble with the law because of a felonious assault shouldn't be held against you. well, this was so absolutely insane, so utterly ludicrous that I broke out laughing in the hall, was able to let go of it. Laid down, went to sleep. No problem. That Saturday, I went over to see the neighbor. I didn't give a single thought to what I was going to say. Say hello, introduce myself. And if the trees came up, I was going to tell them about it. I went and I chatted with him, and he was a remarkably friendly guy. Witty, charming, gracious in all respects. And finally, I was about to leave, forgot why I was there. And by the way, just a moment. Before I go, I wanted to ask you about those trees in the backyard. I said, what trees? I said, well, you've got some trees, the limbs are out over my pool and making it kind of dirty. The hell you say? I said, yeah, come on out, take a look. And I walked out there, and he said, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Oh, I had no idea. I haven't been out here in years because the guy you bought the house from is crazy. You don't dare go in the backyard. I mean, it was, oh, I'm so sorry. I'll get a man in here. We'll cut those down. I'll clean your pool. I'll get it carted all the way. Oh, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. What you must think of me. I'm And when I left, then I said to him, finally, when I departed, I said, by the way, you're a real nice man, and this is a nice neighborhood. I'm glad I moved in. I'm glad to have you as an associate here. But I said, you'll never know how close you came to dying. You see, because the AA bit is involved in my whole life, it's true of all of us. We have developed ways of talking. We have litany now. We're even beginning to chant at the end of the readings. Who will say amen to that? Amen. Don't take a drink. Don't take a drink. In fact, I don't think I'll be truly happy till one time I give a talk and somebody leaps up and speaks in tongues. The closest that's came to me was one time I was speaking out in the San Gabriel Valley, and it was a place where, just beyond any lengths, where everybody who participated, and they had everybody participating. They not only read the chapters 5 and the 3rd, they had individual prayers of the members and all kinds of stuff, and everybody who got up identified himself as an alcoholic, which is a ridiculous thing. I mean, we're gaining in stature, but most people still don't admit they have alcoholism in order to get ahead. If a person tells me he has a social disease, I believe him. I don't demand he whip it out and prove it. But in this group, they all identified, and then they did. And I was splitting a pitch with somebody, and as the time passed, more and more of our jewel-like talks had to be dropped. And finally, they took a coffee break about half an hour before the meeting was to end, and on my time, a newcomer had the unmitigated gall to have a convulsion. I wanted to kick him in the head. Work the steps, work the steps. But we got his tongue depressed ultimately, and he got carried away. And I noticed that in the little time that remained, the audience was extraordinarily attentive, because the message had already been delivered. He wasn't particularly articulate writhing on the floor, but God, he was sincere. I tried to get him to travel with me. Unfortunately, he sobered up. But once the steps are taken, life opens up. And then it's the most magnificent thing, really. I think maybe I recommend this because I'm getting older and I don't, life becomes increasingly precious. Within 50 years, everybody in this room is going to be dead. And we rise like bubbles in champagne and we're gone. A wink of a celestial eye and the room is vacant. I know you young people, I see you out there, you don't believe that, you think you're immortal. I remember one of my sons, when he was in the midst of the testosterone rush, he said to me, Dad, if I should ever die, what the hell do you mean if, punk? It's not a hypothesis, it's a reality, I'm staring at it. Which is true, by the way. I've given up the thought of suicide. How much time would I really save? Let me get right down to it. Okay. So what I recommend to people in those few precious moments is to get out and do it. Anything, everything that you have ever thought about or imagined, get it out and try it. And for God's sakes, try to avoid moderation. Like Oscar Wilde, nothing succeeds like excess. If you're not hurting somebody, do it as enthusiastically and wildly as you can, because you need to if you're alcoholic. I used to describe the things that I did as my way of living, getting out and living the ebullient life. People would ask me, what do you do? You seem enthusiastic. What's your program better than mine? And it's not better. I just do more things, maybe. I asked them, do you learn to fly? They said, no, I did. I went out to the old Whiteman Airport, took 3 hours of training at an anachronistic flight school, soloed, rented a plane that weekend, flew to San Francisco. I didn't know anything about navigation. It didn't have any instruments. I just flew over Highway 101. Ha, ha, yeah. Took my first parachute jump just before I became a grandfather about 25 years ago. Got through the male menopause racing motorcycles with Steve McQueen out in the desert, the only copy of the big book they ever used to see around Mojave. I couldn't do any of those things previously. Hell, we've hiked in the Alps. We've gone down the length of the Grand Canyon on a raft. I took up scuba diving. I know you're supposed to study. You put on snorkels and flippers and practice, but I'm not that kind. I mean, you hum a couple of bars, I pick it up is my approach. But when I came around to AA, they said everything the alcoholic needs to know is in the big book. So why in the hell would I bother with snorkeling? I put on this equipment, leaped off Santa Catalina Island there, down in Seaweed City. It's so beautiful, I stayed down till I ran out of air. I put my higher power to that test. Now, all of these things that I was doing, and by the way, this is the nice thing. You see, you don't need chemical courage on this program because you have the greatest scapegoat ever devised by man. You have God. See, I have not made a mistake in decades. Not the slightest error, no deviation from the power of valor or rectitude, no faux pas have I been guilty of. On the other hand, God has seen fit to do through me some of the dumbest, most petty, egomaniacal, lewd, lurid, self-aggrandizing things you can imagine. But if it gives him pleasure to make me look like a horse's ass, which one of you should criticize? Take it up with him. Other speakers come in here and say that what they tell you is their own opinion. That's not true with me. I've taken the third step. What I tell you is the Word of God. You better listen up. The only trouble is he keeps changing his message about once a month, making me look like an idiot for having misconstrued it in my last talk. But the thing I discovered about all of these things was the other day, not the other day, some time ago now, I was watching one of those PBS shows on the brain. And they were pointing out that the thing that now they've discovered, inter alia, that distinguishes the alcoholic from the non-alcoholic is we do not produce endorphins like they do. That endogenous morphine that comes to stress and strain and relaxes you. That's why everything for us is flamboyant. It's like the color is turned up too hot on the TV. We're either way up or way down. Everything. While we don't have any, as it were, something to soothe the wheels of intercourse when they're going on, and it's a strain for us. I knew a guy one time when I first came around to AA, he was head of an aircraft company or something out in the valley, and he used to talk about that. He said, suppose you were born with a headache. Not a terrible migraine, but a dull, chronic headache. How would you know you had it? You always had it. How you wouldn't know you had it. You would assume other people had it. And you'd look at them and marvel that they seem to get along and to do things in life so easily when for you everything was difficult and hard and painful. And then suppose at about age 14, somebody gave you some aspirin and the headache went away. and you felt one with God and man, what would you do if you were not totally insane? You would take aspirin at every possible occasion, because then you could be like other people. But then suppose the aspirin turns on you, and you began to take more and spend money you shouldn't afford, made you ill, you ended up in a hospital in restraints. You did something so violent society locked you up for it. What would you do? You don't want to hurt your family, you don't want to hurt your community. What would you do? You would quit taking aspirin. And the instant you do, back comes the headache. What he was describing what, in essence, we are like as a result of this inability to produce endorphins. And it hadn't dawned on me that all of the things I described to you just a moment ago, and that I've been talking about living the full life, these are all risk sports. Risk sports produce endorphins. Why do people ride on the roller coaster? Ridiculous. It scares the hell out of them. But when they get off, here, look, you want to go again? They have taken a risk, and their body is pumping full of endorphin. That's an endogenous morphine. They're high. And all of these things I was doing were ways of producing endorphins. There are many ways to produce endorphins. Anything that is painful that you force yourself to do. I had to quit smoking some years back. Smoked 2 to 3 packs of Camels for 35 years. It does amazing things to you. Now that once you're off of something, you look back and you can't understand why you ever did. I say to myself, you come from the backwoods of Oregon, Don. You used to shoot deer and hang the venison in the smoke shed behind the house. You know what smoke did to raw meat. But for 35 years, you made lung jerky. I had to quit smoking. No problem. Once you decide you're going to be a non-smoker, you just get on your knees, bark like a dog for a week, and it's over. It's no big deal. But they got me into running. And I said, you try to save what's left of your lungs, get into running. Well, that's about the most despicable form of locomotion ever devised by the mind of man. I've seen runners all my life, old men usually with gnarled, knobby knees like tree roots, with sweat bands around their heads, grunting and patting on the side of highways. And I think, oh, poor souls, that it should come to that. A fanatic, by the way, is anybody who's doing something a week before I start. I took it up, and I couldn't go half a block. I couldn't shuffle 50 yards. It's just awful. But I continued, we have a thing for pain. And one time I found myself leaving my house to go speak at a meeting, and I was kind of skipping as I went down the walk. And I thought, good God, I hope the neighbors didn't see that. I didn't skip as a boy. I've been called Mr. Gates since I was 13. I allow my intimates to call me sir. What's wrong with you? And I realized nothing was wrong with me. I had actually been on a 2-mile run, and now I was getting the reward. The endogenous morphine was kicking in because the body supplies that which you demand of it. If you stress it, well, you know what happened, of course. If 2 miles will make you high, how about 4, 8, 16? I mean, before the year was out, I was running half marathons. I had stress fractures both feet, bursitis the hip, my back gave out. I didn't have a moment free from pain after I got healthy. But I've run over 5 marathons now, 26 milers. I'm not recommending any of this, but these things will get you high. About the only thing more painful really is a 12-step call. Everybody says when they leave a 12-step call, they always feel wonderful. I know why. It's a pain, God almighty. But anyhow, the program really does work, and I recommend you get out and get it on and get with it. I mentioned earlier about how we use terminology in AA, and I find myself doing it even in my job. I know I shouldn't, but I find myself doing it. We identify with we picked up litany and buzzwords. You're in a shopping line and you bump into somebody as you're both trying to go in. No. First things first. Oh, you easy does it? Oh, you're a friend of Bill's. And, I even find myself, this comes out in my opinions sometimes. In the law, we say things like his complaint sounds in tort, or it sounds in contract, or it sounds in equity. I don't know why we say that. Blackstone said it sounded good. I wrote a decision one time, said appellate's complaint sounds in self-pity and resentment, but states no cause of action known to the law. I wrote one the other day that said, in law as in life, half measures avail us nothing. My colleagues say, where do you get those phrases? I don't know. They just pop. Because I have become somewhat calm. I don't mean to imply that I have ever and ever will become tranquil. I just vibrate to a slightly lower chord. But compared to my colleagues, non-alcoholics, I often am rather tranquil. I mean, a writ will come in, something emergency thing we've got to take care of right away, and they're rushing around. What are we doing? They say, how come you're so casual about it, Don? Don't you see what's going to happen here? I give them the story I gave that guy many years ago. I say, it doesn't matter what happens, and it won't be as bad as the time I was in 4-point restraint and vomited straight up. Well, that's probably true, but I would not have thought about it in that fashion. And this is what it's like. I still have a smart mouth. I can't, One time we had a guy, he had a number of murders. His client had been guilty of a number of murders, and he hadn't been entirely truthful in the beginning. And he was trying to get us not to be too hard on the man. And I heard myself, or at least somebody from where I was seated, saying, don't worry, counselor, we all understand that murder often leads to lying. Fortunately, I didn't follow it up and say, keeps it up, he's going to get drunk in real trouble. But I haven't changed all that much, but what I have done is to get it on. And this is what I'm recommending to everybody. God, get out and do it. If you want to strike a blow for justice, improve society, you have to do it right now. Nobody raises his hand for righteousness' sake in the tomb or any other sake. If you want to do something tender, loving, gentle, kind, good Lord, you got to do that now too. A poet said, the grave, it is a fine and private place, but none, I think, do there embrace. It has to happen right now. The final poet said, the bird of time is but a little way to flutter, and the bird is on the wing. My bird doesn't have very much longer to fly, but I don't want to miss a single beat of those wings, and I hope some of you will stick around and we'll fly together. Thank you.